All right. I'm Joe Turner, and this is the City Manager Unfiltered podcast, a podcast for city managers and other public sector executives. It is the most influential local government podcast in America. And today I want to talk about something that's been gnawing at me for quite a while. There have been two different statements from two different recruiters from two different recruitment firms that have been made or attributed to them in local media reports, local newspapers, and they bother me greatly. And when I read them, my jaw hit the floor and I became immediately frustrated, I guess is putting it mildly. And in one instance, I posted about it publicly on my LinkedIn. That was the Palm Coast recruitment being done by Doug Thomas from Strategic Government Resources, or SGR. And then the second recruitment is the City of Sacramento, California recruitment being done by Pam Derby from CPS HR. These statements attributed to them once again demonstrate and show that recruiters are not our friends, they're not our allies, and I think we as a profession, as professionals, need to start really having a come to Jesus conversation when it comes to how we're going to handle and respond to recruiters who are actively engaging in conduct that is detrimental to us, to our positions as candidates, and hurts us. I mean, they're engaging in activity that is counterproductive to what we're trying to accomplish as candidates and as professionals. And I think they need to be called out on it. But more importantly, I think there needs to be a greater discussion as far as what are we going to do? What is the response? Are we just going to sit on our hands and we're just going to allow this nonsense to continue? Or are we actually going to respond in some way and try to effectuate substantive change? Now, before I get into that in this episode, I want to do a couple of housekeeping updates. First, we are going to reopen the membership for the American Association of Municipal Executives. That's coming soon. Look for it in the middle of June. Okay, so about a month away, we're going to reopen. It'll be the 1 year anniversary. We're going to get that going up. And we're going to reopen the membership. And I'm really excited about what we're going to be accomplishing in the latter part of 2025 and into next year. If you're interested in doing a pre-sign up to get on the wait list so that we can proactively inform you or notify you once we open, you can go into the show notes, click the link, and take 90 seconds to submit your email information and what have you, and we'll keep you updated. Second, as you guys know, we have the AAME job board, jobs.aame.org. It is absolutely free to post any of your senior executive level recruitments. It's free for recruiters, it's free for cities themselves. However, if you would like to have those jobs included in my newsletter, which goes out to 10,000 subscribers every week on LinkedIn, especially if you're trying to reach those passive candidates, right? Those prized passive candidates that aren't actively looking but are reading my newsletter for news and information about what's going on in the profession, you can put those listings in the newsletter for $199. There is a link on the AAME job board, the pricing page. Just click that, and you will see the $199 posting in order to get those listings in the weekly newsletter. All right, let's turn our attention now back to the recruiters and these recruitments in Palm Coast, Florida, and Sacramento, California. I'm not going to belabor the Palm Coast point because I've covered it extensively on my LinkedIn as well as my newsletter. But suffice it to say that that governing body has a history of underpaying their managers, mistreating their managers, undermining them, sabotaging them. And it got so bad that the last two city managers actually left the profession. You had Matthew Morton, who was there for a couple of years. He went into the private sector for a while, but actually just in the last few weeks got back in. He took a job in Florida. And then you also had the former city manager, the most recent one, who was an internal promotion, had been with the organization for something like close to 20 years. They treated her horribly, and she left the profession. So Palm Coast, which has this history of mistreating its managers, has a very dysfunctional council. They decide to hire SGR and Doug Thomas to do the recruitment. Now, let me make something clear here. I am not trying to be confrontational, argumentative, unnecessarily combative. I'm not trying to have a hot take. I genuinely, sincerely, my default position is I just want recruiters and recruitment firms to do better and do right by candidates. I just want them to treat candidates better. That's it. Okay. And I want them to not engage in activity that is counterproductive to the things that we are trying to accomplish in this profession and through the American Association of Municipal Executives, right? We are advocates for city managers, for candidates, and what have you. And when I see things that I feel are counterproductive to that, I want to call it out because I want that behavior to change and I want our side or our concerns to register with the recruiters as well as the local elected officials and so that we can get improvements in the recruitment process. Okay. So I want to make that very clear. I've had really great interactions with SGR over the years. I like Ron Holyfield. I get along with him great. We talk regularly. Lynn Barbosa, I went through one of her recruitments. I think she's phenomenal. I love her to death. I just think she's an amazing woman. And so again, this is not an anti-SGR, anti-Doug Thomas rant. This is a do better rant, okay? And more importantly, this is not just a do better rant. This is a do better, and if you don't, there has to be some sort of consequences on our end to follow up to encourage you to do better, okay? That's what this is about. It's nothing personal, okay? So when I read a quote by Doug Thomas in one of the papers in Palm Coast in January or whatever it was that says, "Hey, we don't recommend that you include the salary range in the job brochure, the job posting," my jaw hit the floor. My reaction was something like, "Are you freaking kidding me? You are telling the governing body not to put the salary range in the job posting? What in the hell are you doing? What in the hell are you talking about?" I don't know one city manager who's okay with that. Now, I posted about it on LinkedIn. I tagged SGR, I tagged Doug Thomas, never got a response. And if I'm being honest, that bothered me. I didn't really like that. Okay, it was kind of shades of Baker Tilly. It kind of reminded me of Baker Tilly not responding after I reached out numerous times to their staff. There's a little caveat to this situation because I did receive some back channel off the record communication that I can't go into, so it wasn't totally like I was ignored, and that's one reason why I kind of held fire on this issue. But because I wasn't happy because Florida recruitments are incredibly risky for managers because of their radical extreme transparency when it comes to the application process. And we all know that city managers across the country are routinely savaged by their existing or current governing bodies when they find out that their city manager is looking for a job elsewhere. They get really butthurt. They're really fragile. They get scorned like scorned lovers, and they take it out on a city manager. And time again, we see these city managers who are applying for a job who get outed, and everything's going fine with their existing council, and then all of a sudden they're separating, and there's a nasty fallout, and that's detrimental. So you have this position in Palm Coast that is not very desirable. It's incredibly risky in a state with laws that are very transparent and open up the manager that place the manager in a very vulnerable position. You throw in the fact that Florida has a 20-week cap on severance, which is below the national norm, right? All the different risks that go along with it. And you expect city manager candidates to just on a hope and a prayer apply for the position and have no clue what the salary range is going to be in a community that has a history of underpaying their city managers? How does that benefit city managers? How does that benefit candidates? Why would I be supportive of that? Why would I be accepting of that as an influencer in the profession, as an advocate with the American Association of Municipal Executives, right? Our mission is to support managers, okay? Why would we be okay with this? Now, some people are going to say, hey, the recruiter, they get paid by the city, they get paid by the county, the organization to do the recruitment. That's who their boss is, that's who their customers, that's who they got to make happy. I get that to a degree. I do. Okay. So if I get that, then you need to understand that I don't give a shit. I advocate for the city manager candidate. So that's where my allegiance is then. So you got to respect that then, right? If you want me to respect your position, then you're going to need to respect my position because if you're going to engage in activity that is detrimental to my peers, my colleagues, then you need to understand there's going to be a retaliatory response of some kind. I think recruiters can advocate for their customer without doing something that's detrimental to the candidate. How about you educate your customer, your elected officials on what the market expects, i.e., what do city manager candidates expect to get out of the process when they're looking at applying for a job. Maybe you should take the time to educate the elected officials that, hey, your applicant pool is not going to be very good if you don't put a salary range given your tumultuous history. How about you start having some hard conversations and educate your elected officials on what the reality is? I can have respect for that. And if you're a recruiter or a recruitment firm who sincerely, genuinely believes that somehow not putting the salary range in the brochure or the job listing is somehow a benefit to the candidates, somehow helps the candidates in some way, then by all means, why don't you make a public statement or make an argument, make a case for that? Go on the public record and tell the professionals that you're recruiting why that is a benefit to them. I'm sure all of us would love to hear that argument. I'm sure we'd all love to hear how rolling the dice and applying for a job on the hope and prayer that their idea of a competitive salary matches what my idea of a competitive salary is. And oh, by the way, I'm just going to assume the risk as a candidate in case those expectations don't align, because there's no risk at play for the governing body in this situation. The risk is being borne by the candidates. So again, I'm not trying to be anti SGR. I'm not trying to be anti Doug Thomas. I'm not trying to be combative. My position is do better for the candidates or else. And then basically, I'm going to speak to you, the listener, all the public sector executives who are listening to this podcast. SGR, CPS HR. There's a lot of these recruitment firms that engage in other consulting services that you guys are hiring to work for your organization on, right? Whether it's a compensation survey or a strategic plan or HR analysis of some kind or some sort of organizational study. You're hiring these recruitment firms to do work for your community while at the same time, the recruiters are sabotaging you, the manager, and your peers in these recruitment processes. How about some of you managers who are employing these recruitment firms who are also doing other consulting services for your organizations? Why don't you start having some conversations and let them know, hey, you know what? I'm not really a big fan of you undercutting city managers, county managers, and whatnot during the recruitment process. And maybe you should consider taking your business elsewhere. Send them a message. How do you expect to get people to change and adjust their behavior or modify their behavior if there's no consequences for behaving poorly? Now let's turn our attention to the city of Sacramento recruitment being done by Pamela Derby and CPS HR. Earlier I said how when I read Doug Thomas's comments about the salary range, my jaw hit the floor and I was like, "Are you freaking kidding me?" When I read the statements attributed to Pamela Derby in the Sacramento Bee, I was livid. I was so heated and pissed off. I fired off an email to her to get her side of the story. She responded, and I will, read those comments here and share with you. But I was so fired up. I could not wrap my head around what I had read in that article, and I just found it so hostile and detrimental to what we are trying to accomplish here. Now, before I get into that article, and I'm going to read it here in a moment, I want to unpack the city of Sacramento and give you some context because I think that's really important. Up until the end of 2024, December 31st of 2024, Howard Chan had been leading the city of Sacramento for many years. He was a longtime employee who was promoted up through the ranks and became the city manager. Spent something like, I think, 25 years with the organization. Don't quote me on the exact number, but he was there for a long time. Howard Chan is incredibly well respected, not only in our profession, amongst our peers throughout California. I consider him a friend. I'm definitely biased in that regard, for full disclosure. But he's also incredibly well respected by his employees, by the stakeholders in the community, the unions, neighborhood groups and associations, the business community. I don't even know how he is able to cobble together all these different sort of relationships and be on good terms with all these different stakeholder and interest groups in a city like Sacramento, because Sacramento is a very, very difficult city to be a city manager in. I would argue it's one of the more difficult cities in the entire nation when you factor in all the political dynamics at play in Sacramento. You got to remember, Sacramento is the capital of California. It's its mayor at the time was a former bigwig in the still a bigwig in the party, but was a high-profile ranking member in a leadership position in the legislature before he came in to be the mayor. I'm talking about Daryl Steinberg. And in Sacramento, you have a bunch of either wannabe politicos who are, stab their mom in the back and run over their grandma to get elected to office and higher office, or you have former politicos who have now taken a step back and are now in the city council. And you have people like Daryl Steinberg who are just political animals. They're in the legislature, then they become mayor, and as soon as they become mayor, they're essentially angling for their next political seat because they can't possibly breathe and live in like a normal existence unless they're somehow holding political office or some sort of power broker. Okay, so Sacramento is just an absolute cesspit of political animals who will stab you in the back. They'll lie to your face. They'll lie to the constituents. And I'll give you a perfect example. Let's go back real quick to 2024 for the election cycle. In November, there were going to be some big changes to the Sacramento City Council. There are going to be some new council members, and there's going to be a new mayor. And in the run up to that election, the mayor at the time and the council had made a decision that they were not going to extend Howard Chan's contract, and they were going to punt it over to the new council that was going to be seated in early December. The problem was that Howard's contract required him to give a 30-day notice period in order for the certain terms to be honored. And if he was not to give a 30-day notice while in limbo, he possibly forfeited a severance and other sort of protections and provisions within that contract. So what happened is the new council and mayor weren't going to be seated until after December 1st, and there had to be a decision made. So Howard, because he had a desire to stay on as the city manager for another year, he agreed and allowed the council. They entered into an agreement to basically, I guess, do away with that 30-day notification requirement under the auspices that they were going to hammer out an agreement to extend his contract for all of 2025. Now, in the mayoral campaign, the two candidates that were running had diametrically opposite positions. Kevin McCarty, who would go on to win the election by a mere 2,000 votes out of about 100,000 cast, had campaigned on the position that he was going to retain Howard Chan. His opponent had openly stated that she was against extending his contract and wanted to go in a different direction. Now, guess what? What do you think Kevin McCarty's first order of business was as soon as he took office as the mayor? You guessed it. He undercut and stabbed Howard in the back, lied to his constituents, lied to his voters that supported him, and basically voted to not extend Howard's contract. Now, there's no question in my mind that had he taken the position of wanting to fire Howard, he would have lost that election. No question in my mind. Think of the balls it takes to make a promise to the voters, and then literally within a week of being seated in office, you're betraying them. I mean, this is the kind of people you're working with and dealing with in Sacramento. And it doesn't even stop with it doesn't even begin and end with Kevin, because you got, like, I think there's 9 members on that governing body, and a handful of other ones are just will outright lie to your face. There's only a couple who will actually be, directly into your face and honest about what their true machinations are, right? Complicating this entire thing is you have the Sacramento Bee, which is littered with opinion pages and reporters who are constantly misleading the readers about what Howard was being paid, his contract negotiations, what he was doing as a city manager. Every other week was a negative hit piece, either in the opinion column or on a news article that was smearing Howard Chan and misrepresenting him with all these different smears, innuendos, etc. We are talking about disingenuous smear merchants at the Sacramento Bee. I mean, these are scumbags who will constantly badger and beat Howard Chan over his compensation, misrepresent his compensation to smear him with the readers, and to basically try to drum him up or try to run him out of town, right? At the same time that they will attack Howard for his compensation, they won't say a damn thing about any other public sector executive or any other executive who's receiving funding from the city of Sacramento about their compensation, right? So Howard, He was getting paid $400,000 a year, $400,000 on the nose. He hadn't received a raise, I think, in 2 years. He did cash out a severance allotment or I'm sorry, a paid time off or leave allotment that boosted his pay considerably. And so they would constantly run his total compensation number as his salary number and misrepresent the truth to the people who are reading the newspaper and to the obviously to the community. But at the same time that they're beating the drum on Howard Chan, they won't say a word about any other public sector executive who was making a crap ton more money than Howard was, and they were running much smaller organizations that are not nearly as complex or as politically divisive and volatile and toxic as the city of Sacramento. Okay, so I want to go down and I want to read you some of these salaries. Okay, first we have Paul Lau, who's the CEO of the Sacramento Utility District. Okay, in 2023, this is 2023, okay? According to public records, he was making salary, not total compensation, $833,000. He's making more than twice the amount of the Sacramento city manager to run a utility district. Okay, no offense to Mr. Lau. I think running a utility district has its complications and its difficulties. It ain't as difficult as running the city of Sacramento. There ain't many headaches. There's not as much political drama and bullshit that goes with running the city of Sacramento, that goes with running the utility district than what Howard Chan was facing in Sacramento. Full stop. No debate. And he's getting paid twice the amount. And I'm not saying he should get paid twice the amount. I'm simply saying, why was the Sacramento Bee shining a spotlight on Paul Lau and his salary if there's somehow community government watchdogs when it comes to the taxpayer's purse? I did a search. There wasn't one article in the SAC Bee. If you can find a SAC Bee article prior to January 1st of 2025, I even go prior to today, I will pay you $100 if you can find me one article from the Sacramento Bee discussing his salary and whether or not it was too high or not. Then you have the Sacramento Regional Transit System. I don't know the CEO's name, but according to public records, in 2023, he was making $396,000 in salary, not full compensation. So he's making $396,000 to run a transportation system, a bus system, or whatever. And you got the city manager of Sacramento making the same amount, and somehow he's overpaid and he's robbing the taxpayers and bilking the taxpayers, and they need to get rid of him. Are you kidding me? This is my personal favorite. Okay, because it isn't just a Sacramento Bee that was talking about Howard Chan's salary. It was haters on the council who wanted to get rid of him who were also bemoaning his salary and saying that he was getting paid too much, even though he's actually getting paid probably below market. And I'm going to get to those numbers in a minute. So there's something called the Greater Sacramento Area Economic Council. Okay, it's a private organization, like a chamber of commerce, so to speak, that the city of Sacramento contributes money to each year. The most recent number I saw was they gave over $200,000 to this organization, and according to their 2023 Form 990 report, which is publicly available document, right? It's an IRS tax filing. They had $3 million in revenue. Get this, $3 million in revenue. And they also got $200,000 from the city of Sacramento taxpayers to run to help support that organization. Do you want to know what the CEO of the Greater Sacramento Area Economic Council got paid according to the Form 990 in 2023? Barry Broom. He's a CEO. He was making $770,000 to run an organization that had $3 million in revenue. So you have the city council in Sacramento, these these disingenuous windbags bumping their gums about about how they think the city manager of Sacramento is underpaid when they have no clue what the market is for a city manager nowadays. And they are funding the same ones who are criticizing Howard Chan's salary, the same ones who are voting to send $200,000 to an organization that has $3 million in annual revenue, paying the CEO nearly $800,000 a year. I'm not making this up. I cannot make this up. This is real life. So that is some of the immediate context I want you to understand as I go through this article in the Sacramento Bee where Pamela Derby from CPS HR, the recruiter who's doing the recruitment for the vacant city manager position in Sacramento, when she makes some of these crazy comments that I just was up in arms about. Okay? So Let me read this article to you right now. This article, dated March 26, 2025, is titled Sacramento's Ex-City Manager Among Highest Paid in California. New hire will likely make less. First of all, that's just one of the dumbest headlines ever, okay? Because Sacramento is literally one of the largest cities in California. It's got over 500,000 people living in it. I think it's the sixth largest city in the state. So I would think that the city manager of the sixth largest city in the state would be among the highest paid city managers in the state of California. Never mind the fact he's making half, right, of what the Sacramento Utility District CEO is making. He's making half of what a private hybrid sort of taxpayer funded chamber of commerce type organization is making. Are you the idiocy knows no bounds. Okay. So this article written by Matthew Miranda says Sacramento is expected to have a new city manager by this fall, and if all goes according to plan, the new hire will not be among the highest paid in the state. These updates were shared at Tuesday night's City Council meeting by Pamela Derby, the Executive Recruitment Manager for CPS HR Consulting. The firm was hired last month and recently completed individual interviews with council members to help guide its search for one of the top positions in the city's government. Derby presented a hiring timeline that estimated the City Council would enter an employment agreement with the final candidate in early August. An exact start date remains unclear, but Derby said it would likely be no later than the first part of October. Former city manager Howard Chan resigned on December 31st after the city council rejected his contract extension. Okay, this guy doesn't know what he's talking about. That's inaccurate. That's a misstatement of the record, okay? Let me clear something up about Howard Chan's separation from the city of Sacramento. That line in the article makes it sound like the city council was showing Howard Chan the door, and that is not accurate. The reason why Howard Chan agreed to remove the 30-day notification requirement is because the council was telling him that they wanted to retain him as their city manager. What happened was when they went through negotiations, Howard was adamant that he wanted a full 1 year extension, whereas the council was trying to get him to agree to essentially a 6 month extension, and so that they could start the recruitment right away for his replacement. And he didn't want to be a lame duck city manager. So let's not get it twisted. Howard could have easily put in his notification that he wanted to basically be done with the city of Sacramento before the new council took office, and he could have gone on about his business. But the reality is that the council made overtures about wanting to keep him, but Howard has principles. He has self-worth. He values himself. He's not a cuck. And he said, "Hey, I'll come back, but you have to agree to my terms. I'm not just going to roll over and let you dictate how things are going to be if you want to extend my contract. I don't need this job. I can go about my business. I can start a new chapter in my life." And the crazy part is the council was so clueless, they didn't even understand that Howard's contract had a provision in there that basically kept him on for the next year, regardless of whether or not they got rid of him or not. Total amateur hour with this governing body. It's a classic situation with these pseudo intellectuals, the people who think they're the smartest people in the room, but really they're not, right? The people who think they know everything, they know the market value for a city manager, but they don't. It's laughable. That is a classic example of how the Sacramento Bee will twist things around to try to put it in a negative light when it comes to Howard. The article goes on to read, the resignation came after months of criticism over Chan's high salary and decision making. In 2023, Chan made roughly $593,000 in total wages, the second highest for a city manager in the state. Again, it was $400,000, but he cashed out $193,000 in leave. The guy had been with the city for 20 some odd years. Okay. So again, he wasn't making $593,000 as a city manager. That number was particularly inflated by Chan's supplemental leave of more than $200,000, according to an analysis conducted by Derby. She said his base salary was quote, 3% behind the market average, end quote, and recommended the council reduce or eliminate that supplemental leave incentive. Now, first of all, She says that his salary is 3% behind the market average. Okay, so at first you're thinking, oh, that sounds pretty good. She's basically saying, hey, Chance actually underpaid. Now, I'm not really a big fan of her talking about eliminating the supplemental leave incentive. I don't think that's her place to get into that discussion. Personally, maybe you guys disagree with me, but we're going to continue this conversation, so you can tell me whether or not you agree with me or not. Derby continues, quote, it's not the norm, and so that would not play into our negotiations, end quote, referring to the supplemental leave that Howard had cashed out. Now, this is where it starts to go off the rails with respect to Derby and where I got frustrated. It says Derby suggested a base salary range of between roughly $273,000 to $420,000. Okay, well, if you just said a second ago he's 3% behind the average and he makes $400,000, why the hell is the salary range that you're listing is 273,000 to 420? Shouldn't your salary range be something like high threes to high fours or mid fours? I'm not following, right? And this is where I get really heated. She also recommended a severance of closer to 6 months. Chan negotiated a severance of 12 months during his term in Sacramento. In California, 12 months is pretty much the norm and standard. And where does she get off even suggesting that they should try to negotiate a 6 month severance with his successor? Am I not the only one that is incensed by this? That a recruiter would actually go around and suggest to the governing body that they should reduce the severance from 12 months to 6 months when they're negotiating with the next hire? Oh, by the way, so you want the next city manager to come in to make less money and also get a worse severance? Now, if you disagree with me, if you think it's okay for a recruiter to engage in that kind of communication with the governing body, when I think the recruiter should be actually educating the governing body about what the norms are for contract negotiations. But if you think that's okay for a recruiter to say, oh, that's their customer, that's their client, that's who they got to serve. So it's okay for them to basically sell out city managers by recommending a ridiculously low salary range. I mean, the interim city manager is making 350 right now. So you're going to suggest that the salary range should be 270 up to 420? And you think it's okay to suggest that the severance should be reduced from 12 months to 6 months? If you think it's okay for a recruiter to do that, then you got to also agree it's okay for me to bash them and it's okay for me to take efforts to hurt their business. Because if they're going to go after our pocketbooks and they're going to come after our salaries and our benefits and what have you, and try to weaken our contractual provisions in the name of serving their client or customer, then we get to do the same when it comes to going to bat for our colleagues, our peers, and engaging in advocacy. Now let's talk about some of the salaries in the state of California. Last year, Stockton's Harry Black, he's no longer there, he's separated. He was making $350,000. Ed Shikata, I'm not sure how to pronounce his name, in Palo Alto, a much smaller city than Sacramento. He's making $415,000 last year. I'm not sure what he's making now. Huntington Beach's Travis Hopkins just signed on for low 300,000s, around 312,000, and he's a first-time city manager. Encinitas, they just hired a new city manager. She's also a first-time city manager, much smaller than Sacramento. She's making 309,000. Temecula city manager, again, another community smaller than Sacramento, making 350,000. Fresno city manager, 308,000. San Jose city manager, 425,000. Santa Clara, you have the current Santa Clara city manager making 418,000 last year. I'm not sure what he's making now. And get this, the COO, the chief operating officer, and the chief utility officer for Santa Clara, they're both making above $400,000. And if you go back to 2022 when Deanna Santana was the Santa Clara city manager, she was making $469,000 in 2022. Those are just some California numbers I was able to quickly remember off the top of my head or doing a quick Google search. Okay, so to suggest that somehow $400,000, for the current governing body to suggest that $400,000 is highway robbery, that they're overpaying, they're underpaying. And here's something else that'll boggle the mind: Springfield, Missouri, a city of about I think 170,000, nowhere close to the cost of living of Sacramento, California. Do you know what they're recruiting, what their salary, the minimum starting salary is for their recruitment right now that they're going through? $350,000. So no, Howard Chan at $400,000 is not overpaid. And if you really think he's overpaid, why the hell is this as the city council contributing $200,000 to a private organization, right? Where they're paying the CEO $770,000 on a mere $3 million worth of revenue. Now, let me read to you my email that I sent to Pamela Derby back in March. Okay. I wrote, "Hello, Pamela. Were your quotes in the SACB article about the Sacramento city manager recruitment accurate? In the article, it reads," and I just reread the quote that I sent to you guys about the salary range and the supplemental leave. And I write, if Chan's base salary of $400,000 was 3% behind the market average, why are you suggesting a terrible salary range with a low end that is about 30% less than what Chan was making? And why are you suggesting to the council that they should only offer up a severance of 6 months? 12 months is very much standard in California, and especially in cities the size of Sacramento. Sacramento is an absolute dumpster fire when it comes to that city council and their penchant to say one thing and do another, especially their mayor. They are a bunch of political animals or wannabe political animals who cannot be trusted, and there are a bunch of other factors that make that job very difficult. To suggest a minimum salary of $273,000, which is lower than a significant number of other cities that are much less risky and volatile, is ridiculous. I'd like to give you an opportunity to comment. And then I gave her my contact information. Now, Pam wrote back, and I'm going to read you her response. "Hi, Joe. I hope this finds you well. I've attached the salary survey conducted by my compensation SME. This document was included in the council's agenda for 325. The city's current salary range is $248,465 to $400,652. So per the comparables, etc., CPS HR recommended appropriate adjustments to that current range. I was not making any comment regarding where I thought a highly qualified candidate would expect to fall in that range. Per California law, we must show some type of salary number being in a range and up to number or singular salary number. As far as the 6 month versus the 12-month severance, I was not making a recommendation, merely sharing the types of things that are typically negotiable. While I represent the client, I also do not want candidates to feel they were treated poorly in the negotiation phase and will always recommend to the council was appropriate given the candidate's years of experience, level of expertise, etc. Please feel free to reach out if this doesn't address your concerns." So it seems her position is that she did not make a recommendation on lowering the severance from 12 months to 6 months. She was merely expressing options. Um, I'll take her at her word for it, I guess. I mean, the Sacramento Bee said that she had made the recommendation, but I've just spent the last 15 minutes or so railing on the Sacramento Bee for twisting things around. So perhaps they got it wrong. Secondarily, it appears that Pamela is essentially saying that because they had an existing salary range for the city manager position, they were updating it using those parameters. Now, I have a problem with that because I think that if you're the recruitment firm and you're trying to educate the governing body on market rates for compensation, that you should be giving them a true salary range that's reflective of the current market that they're looking to hire a city manager in. Does anybody really seriously think that the next city manager for Sacramento is going to come in and make less than the department heads? My understanding is the department heads are making more than 270 some $1,000s. You got the assistants making probably low threes. You have the interim making 350. I don't have these numbers offhand in front of me, but seriously, give them a real range. I mean, I have a problem with the fact that the whole article is basically titled on the idea that the next city manager should make less than Howard Chan, but yet the recruiter says that Howard Chan was actually making 3% below market, but we're not really going to make a true actual range for the next city manager. So we're just going to recommend a range of up to 420 or 270 to 420. But yet what? What happens when the next city manager comes in and says, "You know what? Ed Chiqueta in Palo Alto is making 415 and change in a city that's much smaller than Sacramento." Could you blame the finalists in Sacramento for saying, "Hey, I want to make more than a Palo Alto city manager"? Oh no, sorry, you can't. The range is capped out at 420. We're not going to go above that. I want recruiters to know that that stove is hot. You want to touch the stove when you talk about some of these contractual provisions and salary issues and things like that, and you want to undermine the bargaining power and leverage that candidates have during contract negotiations. there are going to be consequences, so you need to tread lightly. Now, I want to give Derby the benefit of the doubt, but there's an article from April 16th that I want to read a quote from, or a passage from. This article, dated April 16th, 2025, by Matthew Miranda again, is called Sacramento Seeks Public Input on New City Manager. Here's how to get involved. In that article, it says the following. It once again rehashes Chan's $593,000 in total wages, which is again another way of whooping up the hysteria and fanning the flames against Howard by Miranda. But it says in 2023, Chan made roughly $593,000 in total wages, the second highest for a city manager in the state, according to the state controller's office. Derby has suggested, now this is what the article is saying, Derby has suggested modifying certain incentives in a potential contract, including supplemental leave and severance, to ensure the new hire does not make as much. Never mind the fact that the severance is not a salary and the severance is only paid out when you decide to fire a city manager without cause. My message to Pamela and Derby and other recruiters is if you want to make public statements that harm or damage the negotiating power of city managers, the candidates, then you have to be ready for the consequences. And so I would caution any recruiter who's listening to this podcast to think long and hard about what you want to communicate to these elected officials when it comes to the negotiation table for these managers. Your job is to communicate. Let me put it this way. In my opinion, and you can disagree with me, it's your business, right? Your job is to communicate the market realities and educate the elected officials on what the candidates are expecting when it comes to the negotiations. I would be very careful about trying to sabotage or minimize what a city manager can negotiate or earn in that position. And I've stated time and time again that the number one objective during contract negotiations for the candidate is to minimize your downside risk exposure. So there's going to be hell to pay if you have recruiters going out there and trying to stack the deck on city managers when they're trying to negotiate a severance. And negotiating from 12 months down to 6 months, totally unacceptable. Totally unacceptable. Now, I don't want to start a holy war with all the different recruitment firms. I'm not trying to get on the bad side of CPS HR and Pam Derby or SGR and Doug Thomas, but I want to raise this issue and bring it to public attention and scrutiny. You, the recruiter, are being watched and you will be held accountable. I'm willing to give a pass. Once, fool me once, fool me twice, that whole saying, right? Can't fool me again. And I'm going to circle back to what I communicated earlier in this podcast. All the public sector executives who are listening to this podcast, who follow my content, you need to take ownership over enforcing this as well by communicating your concerns or your dissatisfaction about some of the things that are being said or uttered to these elected officials about the recruitments. I know a lot of you are afraid to speak up because you're afraid of getting blackballed or blacklisted or what have you, but you need to stand up and communicate these concerns. And to those individuals who are thinking about applying for the city manager vacancy in Sacramento, think twice. I can't recommend it. I realize that for some people, it's going to be a big step up as far as professional responsibilities, probably for compensation as well. But man, you are really wading into a cesspool. These are shark infested waters. You're dealing with individuals who have no conscience. They're two-faced backstabbers. They talk out of both sides of their mouth. Why do you want to operate in that environment? Life is too short to put your career in the hands of people who will literally run you over and try to ruin your career and reputation, plant stories with the Sacramento Bee, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Think long and hard about it. There are other opportunities out there that are far less stressful, far less volatile, and far more rewarding. It's very hard to find fulfillment and gratification professionally when you're working with political whores. That's the reality. That's the cold, hard truth. So there you have it. That's my rant for today. I'm Joe Turner. This is the City Manager Unfiltered podcast. Please hit that follow, subscribe button. If you like the content, please leave a rating and review on your platform of choice. Catch you next week.